Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special call called The Unique Self and the Evolutionary Man and Woman. I'll be helping run this call. I'm Leslie. It's a 60-minute call, and after about 40 minutes, we'll open up to questions. So if you're listening in over the web, feel free to type in your questions, and when we get toward the Q&A, I'll read those. And if you're calling in and would like to ask a question, then you press *2 on your phone keypad, and that will show me you've raised your hand and have a question. And I'll remind you of this later when we get to the question time. So for now, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Warren Farrell, who will introduce Marc Gafni and John Gray. So take it away, Warren.
I'm Warren Farrell. For those of you who don't know me, I wrote books like The Myth of Male Power and Why Men Are the Way They Are. And John Gray is the author of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and he almost needs no introduction. And Marc Gafni will be focusing a lot on his book today called Your Unique Self, which is a book that I feel extremely powerfully about. It's really the beginning of the process of helping develop the transition from boys and men as human doings, that is, I'm a doctor, a lawyer, a human doing, to boys and men as human beings, and therefore potentially the resolution to the boy crisis that we see before us all around us in the industrialized world today. And so Marc will be talking a fair amount about the unique self, and John and Gray and I will be looking at the next stage in the evolution of man and women along with Marc Gafni.
Warren, thank you for that introduction. This is John Gray. I just want to make sure you hear me all right.
I hear you well.
Excellent.
Marc, would you prefer to start, or would you like John to start?
Whatever, you're the host. We'll follow your direction, John and I. Right, John?
That's correct.
Marc, why don't you start in, since your book is the core of our focus today?
With delight. So first off, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Warren and John, and to be talking about boys to men and unique self and where they meet. And perhaps I can just recount for a moment, Warren, just that kind of moment that we had after a walk with John a couple of weeks back when we were talking about the boy crisis that you both are doing such critical work on. And, what you've written about earlier in Myth of Male Power and John's written about in his language and in his, extensive work, the sense that, boys and men are, the word you use, Warren, is disposability, where you're kind of trained to dispose of yourself, right? Whether it's the death professions, whether it's in war, etc., and that's what's honorable. That's how you serve. And we talked about, well, how do we recalibrate? How do we revision, right, the purpose of a human being, particularly the masculine, but the masculine and the feminine, out of these old mythic categories. And that's really where the unique self conversation comes in. So let me just spend a couple of minutes just talking about, what unique self is about, what we mean by it. My collaborator on this project is a mutual friend of the three of us, Ken Wilbur, who wrote the foreword and, one of the chapters with me, and an afterword. And unique self basically says as follows. Unique self says you're more than just a typology, right? You're more than just a separate self. That your essential identity, who you are in the very core of your being, right, is larger than just the small game that you're playing. Unique self says that you're invited to play a larger game. And it has two steps to it. The first step is what we call the democratization of enlightenment. What I mean by the democratization of enlightenment is that every human being can access an actual experience of enlightenment, and enlightenment is no less and no more than sanity. To be enlightened is to be sane. Right? Sanity means to know my true identity. So if I say I'm John Gray, that'd be funny for a second. I say it a second time, it's not that funny. A third time, it's weird. And the fourth time, you hang up the call because I'm insane. I don't know who I am. I don't know my true identity. So sanity is to know my true identity. So the difference between being Marc Gafni or John Gray, other than the fact that he's better looking, right, is relatively small compared to the difference between thinking that I'm merely a separate self, that I'm merely a small self, and not realizing that actually I'm a true self, that my true self is the true self, that I'm an inextricable part of the seamless code of the universe. And that classically was called enlightenment, and it was reserved for the elite, in the back streets of Jerusalem and Damascus, on a mountaintop, in Nepal or in the Himalayas. And we need to move to a place today where, just like we've moved to the democratization of governance, we need to move to the democratization of greatness, to the democratization of enlightenment, where we realize that actually realizing that essential truth about our identity, which is sanity, it's no less and more than sanity, knowing the true nature of my identity, is an available, genuine option for every human being. So that's step one. And then step two, Warren, would be the second critical step. And the second critical step is to realize, hey, I'm not only a true self, because the total number of true selves on this phone call is one. John, Mark, Warren, Leslie, who's monitoring, 120 people signed up for the call, but we're all one true self. We're all part of the same true self. But actually, each one of our true selves sees through a unique set of eyes. Each one of our true selves, right, is a unique perspective. And that unique perspective births unique gifts. And those unique gifts create unique response abilities to respond. We're all irreducibly unique. And this is a key breakthrough, meaning uniqueness is not just a function of the separate self-individual. It's not just a function of the Western Enlightenment that talks about the separate self-individual, but if you're actually really in essence, you realize uniqueness is gone, separateness and uniqueness, you move beyond them. No, you move beyond your limited experience of separateness. You realize you're actually inextricably bound with the great system of the all, the seamless code of the universe. But you realize that the seamless code of the universe is seamless, but it's not featureless. And you are its unique feature. So to summarize, and I want to make this as short as possible just to really have a lot of breathing room here, let me try and say it as follows. If you think you're only a separate self, you think that you're a puzzle piece, but that there's no puzzle. There's just me, this jagged puzzle piece, separate self, and you're competing, grasping, right, and lost, in all of that tragic sense of limitation and death. Level two, if you think you're a true self, that's classical enlightenment, right? Wow, I'm a true self. You think there's only a puzzle, and the lines between the puzzle pieces, you think that's an illusion. But really, there's just one, right? And you got to get rid of your sense of being not only separate, your sense of being unique to be part of the larger one. And that's a good step in realization, to realize I'm part of this larger system. I'm inextricably connected. I begin to have an evolutionary consciousness. But when I really awaken most deeply, I realize I'm unique self. I'm a puzzle piece that's part of a larger puzzle. And by being my unique puzzle piece, I actually fit in, and I'm held and contribute my unique gift to the larger whole. And if you will, God, and again, God you don't believe in doesn't exist. Not the mythic God. God, source, the unique being intelligence that animates and is the eros of all that is, right? God is having a Warren experience. God's having a Mark experience, a Leslie experience, right? All that is, the love intelligence and love beauty of all that is, lives uniquely through me, and my joy, my creativity, right? My very life is a byproduct, a natural function of me living my unique story and giving my unique gifts. And so what we've done is we've evolved uniqueness from merely a typology of the ego, of the distracted and contracted separate self, to realizing that uniqueness is a property of essence. I'm born to live my unique self and give those unique gifts that are required by all that is, that are an expression, a unique expression of all that is living in me, as me, and through me. So that would be an introduction, Warren.
Great. John, your thoughts on this whole journey from boys to men and where the unique self becomes a part of that, or whatever you're inspired to share at this point?
Well, as we're talking about unique self, I completely resonate in terms of my own personal development and the exploration of consciousness and higher consciousness. And for me, it's always been the sense of finding that part which is transcendental, which goes beyond, which is undifferentiated, which is unbounded, unlimited, and making that a concrete experience on a regular basis through practice. And then eventually emerging to realize that that is the source of my individual expression. And that comes at a later stage. As that becomes grounded, that's the space between every thought, and every thought is an expression of that ocean which rises up in unique waves. So you've got this huge ocean, and each little ripple in that is a unique self. And I love how Marc talks about, this is God having a Warren experience and God having a Marc experience. And it's the universal being expressed through the individual, and that individual is intricately expressed, intricate part of the whole and necessary for the whole to, and a significant part of the whole to continue to rise and fall and express itself, evolve, and so forth. And that's as a spiritual foundation, a clarity which is often missed today. And the work that we're doing together, Warren, in our project, which is Boys to Men, which is helping to lay the foundation for the authentic self to emerge in our children today. Is, as Marc says, the accessibility to the authentic self is no longer limited to the sages on the mountaintops. There is an evolutionary transformation that has been taking place in the last 50 years that I've been alive. I'm 60, but my adult self started about 18 when I started meditation, and I know what the experiences of meditation were then, and read the literature and so forth. And having been a very astute, dedicated student, for 9 years of concentrated practice and so forth, was able to have these experiences. What I see is that people today are getting the benefit of those experiences quite quickly, and that there's a speeding up in our consciousness and in our world consciousness, and people are shifting. Our lives are filled with so much more information every second, and we're processing. This helps. There's a speeding up, which has been predicted, and I believe it's happening now. And the practical aspect of that is greater access to authenticity of who we are. And even as children growing up, we have to recognize that our kids, I have 3 children, and now I have grandchildren, and they're all brighter and smarter and more conscious than I was in my generation. And in my working with younger people, they're able to do in a few weeks what took me years to accomplish. So it's an amazing world today. And that greater self-consciousness is what can take us beyond Mars and Venus, which is a project both Marc and Warren and I are working on, which is taking the basic principles that I observed 30 years ago, which is your traditional male and your traditional female, and understanding some of the hard wiring and the conditioning that we get and so forth, and realize that something amazing is happening today with this increase of consciousness of our unique self. Men are actually, whether they know it or not, they're suddenly becoming aware of the wholeness of who they are, which is inclusive of not just masculine qualities but feminine qualities as well. And likewise, women have greater self-awareness, which makes them aware of the masculine as well as the feminine. And what's happening for our boys, which is a great crisis today, is they're not always getting the support that they require in order to develop their masculinity. What's happened as agents of change through expressing discontent, women have dramatically shifted things quite a bit in favor of teaching practices to help girls, therapy to help girls. In my own world of therapy, 90% of the people who go to therapists are women, and therefore it's all skewed towards women's needs. And if we don't have a recognition that men and women really are different, there is a physiological, profound difference in where we come from, but we can find that wholeness and that connectedness through our relationships, through our communication, and we can grow in our wholeness that way. But boys come in with different hormonal balances, with different challenges. We can see it quite clearly. Warren will speak to that in a moment. Girls have their own set of challenges as well, and they tend to be quite different. And the more we can be aware of this need in boys to get the kind of support that is unique to boys, we're sort of losing that. Ironically, as we take this step forward in evolutionary consciousness of becoming more whole, a lot of, it's like blue is good for girls and blue is good for boys, and pink is good for boys and pink is good for girls, and we have a nonsensical, a blind perspective that there's no difference between boys and girls when there are. And statistically, we can see it. Behaviorally, we can see it. And we can recognize that this shift in consciousness, which brings us to a threshold of tremendous growth in our ability to experience fulfillment and creativity and success and respect and equality and mutual compassion. That step is, we're right at the threshold, but as with any major shift, there's crisis because all the rules change. Everything's changing. And to put simply in terms of the relationships that I'm counseling with every day, it's women becoming more self-aware, moving towards the masculine and disconnecting from their feminine, not forgetting in a sense, not knowing how to nurture both at the same time. And for men, moving more to their feeling side, more emotional side, without being able to maintain a sense of stability and groundedness in his masculine qualities, which are also rooted in his masculine hormones, things like testosterone and so forth. For women, maintaining a balance of estrogen and progesterone. These things become disruptive as the roles in our life change, as our culture is suddenly changing. We have to create this culture which is inclusive of, the whole person, which is one way of expressing the authentic self that Marc expresses so beautifully in spiritual concepts, and Warren expresses very practically in terms of our new book with Warren and I is helping the transition of boys to men, where a boy can experience his whole self rather than being seen as something which is expendable, which is the traditional male, is that he can bring in more other qualities to become a whole person and to create a culture that's aware of that can promote this kind of change. And as boys don't get that support, they're lagging behind and they're suffering, and we can help them.
Yes, very good, very good. John, shall I shoot a few?
Yes, I thought you would pick up there talking about
sure,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think looking at the boys to men in this connection of this to this unique self idea is really crucial. I see two things happening simultaneously. One is we had this enormous opportunity for boys to become, for the first time in human history, instead of every culture that survived having to call upon its sons to be disposable in war or disposable in work, we suddenly have this opportunity of people saying, in many cultures that are industrialized cultures, we can start saying to our son, not what helps the culture survive, but the culture is taking care of survival well enough, at least in the middle and upper middle class in industrialized nations, to allow boys to become something more than they ever had a chance to be before, which is a money machine, and also risking disposability in war or in work in order to be a hero. And so that's all the possibility. At the same time, this possibility is not being exploited. In schools, we have less recess, and so boys are becoming, they're not having their need for physical activity fulfilled. We're having vocational education is disappearing, and so boys are not having a sense of purpose, that being able to do something. They don't have the old sense of purpose that I have to be a warrior and kill dragons. They don't have the old sense of purpose, so I have to take care of my family. I'm going to have 6, 7, 8, 9 children, and I have to take care of my wife and my children. And if I just do that, even in a coal mine, I'll feel like I have a sense of purpose. I'll be respected. I'll be a hero. So that's not there. The old sense of purpose of mom and dad saying you have to do 14 things to get my approval. You have to be a good, a good future rabbi if you're intellectual. You have to be a good future doctor if you're not intellectual. You have to be a good, coal miner if you're less intellectual. Those parents today are not sort of saying you have to do 14 things to get my approval. They're saying you get a gold star no matter what you do. And so, therefore, no matter what he does, he gets a gold star, so he has nothing to really strive for in the way that we used to have. He gets sex much more easily, or gets it as video pornography. So many of his needs are being met in a way that have never been met before, and there's no sort of jumping point to say, what am I? What can I be? What can he be? He can be whoever he wants to be. He can be his unique self. But no one is teaching him how to become his unique self, how to discover it, how to go through that path, the old initiation processes of, like, if you're in a warrior culture, you get circumcised at the age of 13 without anesthesia, and that circumcision would prove, if you didn't flinch, that you were a real man. That's no longer needed, but what is needed instead? That was the rite of passage that all the elders said, if you did this, you become a man. But and we see the outdatedness of that, but no one is substituting a new rite of passage, a rite of passage that says your ability to adapt is really crucial, your ability to explore. So in my own growing up, I assumed when I was a boy that I was going to be a lawyer, and then my mother read to me a study when I was in 11th grade in high school about the fact that lawyers had got more divorces than any other single white-collar profession. Mm. And within 1 minute, I realized that I saw why. Anybody that wins an argument basically loses a relationship. And so, why should I spend my life learning skill sets that are going to make me alienated from the people I love? And so I gave that up. And then I became an English major, and I thought, well, all right, I'll do an English major, but that didn't really speak to me. And so then I decided that politics did speak to me, so I became a political scientist. Then the women's movement surfaced, and suddenly I was invested in being a career political scientist when the women's movement surfaced, and that spoke to me. But then so I was able to give up my professional development at that point as a political scientist and redo myself, if you will, rediscover a more unique aspect of myself as someone who really resonated to what the women's movement was saying. And that worked for many years, but then at a certain point, certain things that the women's movement was saying were continuing to resonate, certain things were not, and I discovered that my unique self was not in following a party line or being politically correct or saying what other people were saying when it didn't ring true to me, and so I had to discover another part of myself that could say what part of what the women's movement is saying do I agree with, what things am I discovering anew, and then I would meet John, and John and I went on some 1,000 walks together, and as we talked about some of the differences between men and women, I saw which things that he was saying really resonated for me, and so it was constantly carving out and allowing myself to adapt and change and to re-ask myself what is tuning into what is honest for me and true for me. And so that's sort of part of my journey for that, and that's what I'd like, our book, Boys to Men, to be able to eventually bring to the world. But what I'm also like is, that I find that, as John and I walk and we talk, my thinking morphs, and one of the reasons I've asked the people that I respect to be on this phone call with us is to, I've oftentimes written books, and then after the book comes in, is finished, people that I respect write me and say, I love your book, but this could be different and that could be different, but I never have a chance to go back and change it. And I thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to sort of throw some of our ideas out in their process where they can be informed by the other bright and intelligent authors and that are on the phone call today with us that can add thoughts to our thoughts.
Yeah. So maybe here, that's Warren. That's so great. So maybe here just to maybe pick up on the thread for a second.
For people that just joined the call, this is Marc Gafni speaking now, who's the author of The Unique Self.
Thank you, Warren. Thank you so much. Thank you, John. Let's really talk about and really hone in on, for the next, few minutes until we get to Q&A in about 12 minutes, the relationship between Boys to Men and Unique Self. Because, and I think you and John really both spoke to it, so let me try and pick up from there. You have a boy who grows up today, right? As you said so beautifully, and John said, all of the old heroic initiations aren't available. And the heroic initiations were often hijacked by culture, in a way that didn't serve, boys becoming men. You had to fight in a war that might have been unjust. You had to, work your entire life, to support a family that you're not quite sure where it emerged from. You're not quite sure what your relationship is, and you're kind of spend your life, on a treadmill and then you die. And we've kind of changed that world. We've offered an enormous amount of options, right, to human beings. The world's changed. And we're not, at least in the Western world, stuck at this very moment in the morass of necessary wars. So as a boy grows up and he's not challenged to a heroic journey, right? Sexuality is easily available, right? So what happens, right? What happens to the boy's sense of being valuable, being meaningful, right? Being challenged? Because if why do boys like football? why do boys like boxing? Right? People, always say, I've read any number of feminist tracts which say, God, football and boxing are brutal. Well, they are brutal. Right? Of course they're brutal, but what's the attraction? There's an attraction to the masculine, right, to being on the edge, right, to challenging my potential, right, inviting myself to reach and really be on the edge in a particular kind of, purpose-driven way. And if you basically denude the world of purpose, particularly denude the world of a unique purpose that I can fulfill, then you basically leave both men and women, but right now we'll focus on the masculine, right, without any sense of what am I doing here? What's the game? What are the patterns that connect, that invite me to live, a purpose-driven life? And so what's happened is purpose has become hijacked. So Rick Warren's book, for example, my colleague, right, who writes a book called The Purpose-Driven Life, right, defines purpose in fundamentalist terms. Purpose means to fulfill in an obedient way, the particular, invocations of Jesus the Christ, right, seen through a fundamentalist lens. And of course, Jesus the Christ is awesome and beautiful and holy, but seen through a fundamentalist lens, right, becomes something very different. So in a post-fundamentalist world, what's purpose mean? And that's what unique self is about. Unique self is, and the entire book is about really a deep, we go through every dimension of living, from parenting, right, to sexuality, right, to love, to shadow work, to, my place in the evolutionary context, right, to joy, right. What does it mean to actually realize that I am utterly unique, not just typologically, not just this is the way that my ego is structured because of my early childhood experiences, but I'm irreducibly unique, that there's something that I can do that no one else can do but me. There's a gift that I have to give. There's a way of being and becoming. There's a poem I have to write, a story that I have to tell and live, a song that I have to sing, a way of being, loving, living, and laughing that's mine and uniquely mine alone. And that realization, number one, and number two, to identify in an evolving way what that unique self is, that becomes the heroic journey of my life. And so in the Boys to Men story, right, by reclaiming unique self in a post-fundamentalist way, or reclaiming unique self, right, on every level of consciousness, right, unique self works whether I'm, a fundamentalist Jew or Christian or Muslim, or whether I'm a complete liberal progressive, or whether I'm a right-wing conservative and I'm the president of the NRA. We actually get it on all levels of consciousness, right? I'm here to do something. I'm here to serve in a particular way, right? To be and become in a particular way that's not like anyone else on the planet. And paradoxically, that's not narcissism. It's not self-involvement, because actually that unique self, that unique gift, is actually what connects me to everyone. It's the road and portal, right, to service, right, to offering my gifts. And if we begin to understand that, then the journey of Boys to Men is the journey of realizing my unique self, identifying my unique self, giving my unique gift, right? Fulfilling my unique responsibility, my ability to respond in a way that no one else was able to respond, my ability to fill a unique need in the world that no one else in the world can fulfill in the particular way that I can fulfill it. And we all know, how much joy there is when you're doing something. I mean, imagine, here's last image. Barack Obama calls you, says, Warren, I've been watching you for a lot of years. You and John Gray, we need that book. And actually, it's the only book now. If Barack's tracking, he knows that's true, right? He calls you and he says, right. He says, this is where it's happening. Mark, Timothy, we need, Timothy, I need you to be the kind of, father, for your two sons. Jacqueline, we need you to do this particular thing that you can do in your family system, whatever it is. But you realize, oh my God, the universe is calling you and saying you're needed to become, and give these gifts in a way that no one else can do it but you. That invests life and animates it with an authentic sense of purpose and realization that changes the game. And all of a sudden, it's not about disposability, right? But it's about actually radically realizing my uniqueness, not as a way of differentiating and separating from, but as the actual currency of service, connection, and joy. And so your unique self and Boys to Men are actually two pieces in that sense of this puzzle, and unique self becomes, the kind of component, right, in the Boys to Men story, which allows us to reclaim purpose, right? Unique purpose, right? In a way that invests and changes the game.
So, Mark, you are a father of both a Zion is how old now?
Zion's 2.
Two.
We just went trick-or-treating last night.
Yes. Okay, so you're a dad of Zion, and you're a dad of a boy in the Israeli military. And
Two boys.
2 boys. Both of them are in the Israeli military?
Both of them just finished, their tours as commanders in the Israeli army, yes.
Very good. And so how do you apply what you're talking about to your older sons and to your young son?
That's such a great question. I mean, in other words, and I also have a daughter, Venus and Mars. So basically what I would say to my kids, merging out of what you said and what John said, we talked about the beyond Venus and Mars, is that actually, hey, Eitan, which is my older son's name, Eitan, you have unique masculine and feminine qualities. And the combination between your masculine and feminine qualities, right, that unique combination, right, and your unique expression of each one of them, right, make you a unique person unlike any other. What I need you to do, Eitan, is to actually work really carefully on developing your masculine, which means this, and this, what the qualities are, and we'll talk about those in a different call and in the book, right, both in the Boys to Men book and in Beyond Venus and Mars project, right? So you got to develop those masculine qualities. You got to develop those feminine qualities. You got to integrate them in a way that works together, and from that, let's identify, Eitan, what's the gift you can give with your wife Hadass, in our family context, in your community, what's the need that you can meet that actually no one else can quite meet like you can? And Eitan and I have had this conversation, and it's exhilarating. Mm-hmm. It's ecstatic. I mean, that kind of conversation between a father and a son, and then Eitan figures out, okay, I can actually go back, and Eitan's now working with, youth at risk, right, at the same high school that he went to, right, and he's actually, creating groups of kids, right, that came out of the Army, a similar experience that he had, had a hard high school, and he's working in a high school that works with that particular population because that's how he can give a unique gift. And he realizes that's not the whole story, though, but the unique way that he plays his guitar, the unique way that he prays, or the unique way that he, works with his wife on their relationship, right, actually shifts something in the universe and the way he bees in his village, right, near Jerusalem, et cetera. So that unique self-conversation where you kind of list, well, what are my unique strengths? What are my unique needs that I need to meet? What are my, unique, pleasures? And you put together, what's my unique pleasure? What's my unique gift? What are the unique needs that need addressing? What are my unique needs? And you put it all together, and you begin to actually get this real sense of, wow, this is what I need to be doing. This is what I need to be living. But when you come from a place where you realize no one else in the world can do this but me, right, it opens your heart, and, it just invests your life with the meaning that's already there. But you become aware of it, and it creates an incredible sense of energy, creativity, and joy.
As we talk about the unique self, this is John Gray here, you can actually look at people who are world-class in what they do. I'm just imaging a few right here, but it'd be like a Michael Jackson. Extremely unique character. There's nobody like him. You look at a Sting, nobody sounds like him. I remember listening to an interview with Sting where he says, whether you like my music or not, when you hear my voice, it's me. And said this is what music producers, for example, look for. It's not just somebody who can express music beautifully and hit all the notes and has the range, but it's somehow the world-class performers in that sense, in that context, all have a uniqueness which can be identifiable. And this is, as we emerge through our unique self, we find that we have that uniqueness and we express
exactly.
it.
Not just the world-class performers.
That's
Beautiful.
Right. We all have that. But often we temper our authentic self by wanting to please dysfunctional culture. So that would be a concept here of wanting to please a dysfunctional parent or please a dysfunctional culture or grow up in a dysfunctional culture. And I would propose here that our culture is very dysfunctional, more so now than ever before, because it doesn't fit with the emerging spirit of consciousness that our children have today, because they are more whole and more complete. They are faster. Their brains work faster. And if we don't adjust our culture to respect and support that, then we will have these problems. And it's what Warren was talking about, which is incredibly significant to this conversation and to masculinity. Not as much the femininity. There'd be other issues that would come up with femininity. But that's not our focus in Boys to Men. But for boys particularly, you used the phrase, Mark, is that when you're in touch with your authentic self, spirit is called through you, and you're
Right.
to fit into this world. There's a motivation that says you are needed. You are in the right place at the right time, and nobody else could do what's necessary except you. That's that fitting in to the universe, and that's a wonderful ecstatic experience that you can glimpse and gradually live when you're doing those actions which inspire you. And the way you find that is, of course, in a process for the younger years growing up, is mentorship, is when you're inspired by what somebody who is more accomplished can say or do or be, that when you find something that inspires you, to follow that and learn that, to realize that that is somehow an expression of what you are to become in some way, not exactly, but it helps lead you along that path, is finding that inspiration, that inner motivation. And when we look at boys to men, this is our foundation of finding the authentic self and fully expressing it. We need the assistance of our parents, which Warren and I are helping parents understand that they can support this positive process or hinder it by the way they parent children. And they don't have the choice at this point without the knowledge of what's required, because a new set of knowledge is required. A symptom of the failure of our culture right now to help the children of today is the massive amounts of dependence on ADD and ADHD drugs that we're seeing in boys. It may be as much as 1 out of 6 boys in the United States is actually taking methamphetamine-type drug, Ritalin or Adderall, in order for that child to be sufficiently motivated. Using a drug disconnects you from your authentic self, and this is what parents need to understand. It's suddenly the drug is what's causing the motivation rather than the challenges that parents present to their children, which in itself is a challenge because you don't want to over-challenge them, then the child feels like a failure. You don't want to make it too easy, which many parents are doing today, as Warren was pointing out. You're getting gold stars for just eating your broccoli, as opposed to, getting gold stars for doing work that's meaningful and makes a difference, and you're doing your chores and you're winning your parents' approval and you're helping out, and life is a difficult life and we're surviving and struggling here. All of that has been washed away, and suddenly it's like, what is the motivation for children today? When parents make it too easy and they're getting gold stars all the time, then what's going on is children don't have the ability to earn their parents' approval. When it's boys, if they're not earning their way, they're not producing the brain chemicals and the hormones necessary for the development of the male. And in doing so, there's a lack of motivation, there's a distractedness, a lack of focus, and so forth, which then you don't feel a sense of fulfillment. And then you come in and give it a drug to produce those brain chemicals. Dopamine in particular is a pleasurable brain chemical, the brain chemical of pleasure. So now you're basically saying to your children, take this drug and then you'll feel better. And if you do this, I'll give you the drug. And that's the whole example of if you eat your broccoli, I'll give you your dessert.
We do have a couple questions. One comes in from Theo in British Columbia, Canada. And his question starts like this. We're starting to deliver talks to high school classes on the different kinds of domestic violence, emotional and physical. High school students seem to define violence as simply murder and rape, but little beyond that. How would you weave the concept of unique self into educating high school students, particularly boys, about domestic violence and redefining the current feminist mindset of male perpetrator and female victim?
It's a great question, by the way. Thank you for the question. I think Warren's going to have an amazing answer for that, so I'll call right in.
Okay, where were we? I apologize. I'm not sure
we're in
what
a question
there.
of how to reframe our education in high school, I think it was high school, regarding violence. And I think apropos to what just happened is it really needs to be understood one of the differences between men and women, well, one of the similarities is that when we tend to speak different languages, but we all tend to misinterpret each other. And that when communication breaks down, literally blood flow will stop to the front part of the brain where we're able to be human. We're able to express our authentic self. When one is in a state of authenticity, there will be more blood flow to the front part of the brain. And when people don't have communication tools, they will tend to begin having more blood flow go to the emotional part of the brain, the limbic system of the brain, and the back part of the brain. And we tend to go into sort of prehistoric, unconscious reactions, and people become reactive. And for men, when men are feeling threatened, their tendency is to go into action without thinking, and that's what we call violence. Women will tend to go into talking without considering the effects of what they're saying. And while we don't acknowledge it as much in our society, violence is not just physical, but violence or hurting someone can be verbal just as well. And ironically, where feminists would certainly may take objection with what I've just said, it's really the feminists who will often say that words can be more abusive than actual physical actions. And as an expert and counselor where physical abuse has taken place in relationships, it's never one case where I've seen only one person is responsible for it. It's always communication breaking down, people feeling extremely frustrated, and then the anger takes over, and men tend to become more physical. Women will be physical as well, but quite often men are bigger and stronger and can have a bigger impact. But having said that, men do have 30 times more testosterone, which causes a stronger, more unconscious, automatic physical reaction. And in terms of avoiding violence, we need to both realize that words and conversation leading up to violence is just as significant as the violence itself.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Warren?
I don't think we got Warren back. But I think
Leslie?
we can take another question if you don't have more to say on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's let me just say one word about that, which is that, the issue that you say, John, which is that it's always...
I can hear, this is Warren, I can hear bits and pieces of things, but I can't hear any full words.
Warren, why don't you call in on the 713-300-0182 number? Do you have that number?
I don't know whether I can hear hesitations. I don't know whether it's inquiring about me or not, but I'm gonna. I'll be here, but I won't be. I'll let you know if I can hear you all again.
Okay. So, and so to everyone listening to the call, right? We've used this call line, I don't know, 500 times. So I'm not sure if it's an AT&T problem, but whatever it is, we'll handle it gracefully and move deeper into this call. So, John, the domestic violence, we actually know that the statistics are that there's an equal amount of incidences of violence is reported on actually both sides of the spectrum, which is so completely interesting, of course. And really, on both sides, if the entire sense of uniqueness, the entire sense of authenticity, is bound up, in a particular relationship, and that relationship's not working, and my entire identity is bound up with that relationship, right? And I don't have the communication tools to effectively traverse that chasm, wow, we're in big trouble. But if basically I have a sense that I'm actually a unique self, right? Actually, I'm a unique expression of all that is, and that uniqueness isn't actually dependent, right, on my identity or role in any particular place, in any relationship, or even in any family. That no one, that actually within my very being, right, I can actually express my uniqueness, then I can actually relax into the family dynamic and be really committed to it and serve it without feeling desperate around it. Without feeling that, when people get divorced, right, and they feel like my entire identity is bound up with my partner, well then, if I lose my partner, if my partner's mad at me, well then I'm dead. There's a kind of desperation. And that's where the kind of dignity of knowing that, wow, I'm a true self and I'm a unique self. I have an authenticity. I have a unique gift to give. And whatever context I'm going to be able to give it, that frees me and liberates me, right, to step into the fullness, right, of the relationship, of the commitment. And so in that way as well, unique self actually reduces that testosterone move to violence or that, feminine move to its own forms of abuse, because it removes the desperation, right? It allows me to realize that I have an independent and irreducible uniqueness, and so therefore I don't need to desperately, right, and violently and ragefully, right, claim that I exist by proving my place, in this particular argument or context. So
Marc, exactly.
I'd
love to just reinforce that, and the common terms I experience over and over with couples is where we start to, as you said, when someone is not aware of their authentic self, they're seeking their authentic self. That's our nature. And
right.
You're seeking to know yourself through the reflection of your partner. So if your partner is loving and supportive of you, then you feel more close to you're connected to your authentic self. You go, oh, I feel really good. But if you're not anchored in your authentic self, on that day when your partner isn't being immediately cooperative and loving and appreciative and pliable and yielding to whatever your thought and wish is, and that they are not suddenly reflecting all that good feeling towards you, then suddenly we seek to control and change them, to depend on them to come back to what feels like authentic self, which is I love myself, I'm a good person, this is what authentic self is a magnificent being here in this world with genius abilities to make a difference. And when people love us, we can connect to that. We go, oh, yes, this is
right.
who I am. But as long as we're dependent on our partners for that, when they take that away, then even to the extent of violence, we want to change
right.
them back. And this is the whole importance of finding one's unique and authentic self. It's the foundation of having truly a successful relationship where you're sharing who you are, never having to lose who you are dependent on your partner to know who you are.
Marc, this is Warren.
Please.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I hear you perfectly.
Oh, great. Okay, I finally can hear you again, both of you again. Was that a response to a question that had come in?
Yes, but
Great.
I think we should probably move on to another question.
Yeah,
sure.
Take another question.
Well, we have a couple here. From Jim in Menlo Park. He says, I remember having a discussion with Robert Bly about these issues some years ago. He said something to me that I've never forgotten. It's one thing to feel ashamed for my behavior when that's called for. It's another to feel ashamed for being male. This was said in relation to how some men feel in relation to how women related to them. How are we as men to speak or respond to the fear that women feel toward men, which in my opinion promotes male shame and by extension male disposability?
This is Warren. May I take that one?
Warren,
yes.
For sure, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think almost every male who's heterosexual feels a core shame based on the attitude towards sexuality. So if you have parents watching a 14 and a 9-year-old boy and girl watch TV and they're watching CSI, you don't tend to turn the TV off if people are violent and killing each other. But if you walk by and you see a man and a woman having sex together and they're nude and a penis is going into a vagina, most parents would be shocked and turn the TV off immediately. So the basic message is that sex is dirty, and sex is worse than violence and killing. But yet we ask boys still to be expected to initiate the sex. Girls now have the option, but boys still have the expectation. So boys, being the less mature sex on average, knowing very little about sex, very little bit about girls, and the less mature sex are expected to risk rejection about something that's dirty with a gender that's more mature. So they're both basically being told sex is dirty, you risk the dirt. And I think boys, when they start to understand that girls on average, particularly the girls to whom they're most attracted, the cheerleaders, the most attractive girls in school, the ones that look like the free porn that they can get, those girls are the most difficult they're the ones that they'll get rejected by the most. They want sex from a girl that doesn't want it as much as they do, it's bad what they want, that's the beginning of shame in almost every heterosexual male. If you're a gay male, you feel even more shame because you're not only feeling sexual feelings, but you're feeling them toward the, quote, wrong sex. And you have to overcome all the, depending on where in the country you live, you have to overcome another set of barriers in addition to our antagonism or our feelings that sex is dirty. So I think shame so one of the reasons why boys, I believe, are open to being sold that they will be wonderful if they're disposable in war and you become a hero, is that they learn that the girl, if they're a hero and they're wearing a uniform or they're making a great deal of money, that the girl will like them better. So the disposability is actually a compensation for the shame. You feel shame that you aren't worthy of a girl, that you're morally inferior to a girl, and you have to do something to compensate. You either have to pay for her if she's beautiful, you have to perform for her, you have to risk your life for her on the football field or wherever, and then you will be worthy of equality to her. And that's the connection that I see between shame and disposability that I don't think has really ever been discussed before.
Yeah. And I would like to support you, Warren, in that and just point out that, many men, and also our questioner, the wisdom in the question, many men aren't even aware of shame. It's like, it's a feeling that pervades their life, but they're not even aware that it's actually what shame means is you feel bad about yourself, basically. Something's bad about you. You're not being your authentic self. And when men are emerging in their masculinity at puberty, this is when masculine hormones are starting to peak. They're starting to come forward at that time, and one of the symptoms of it is increased interest in sex, and you're suddenly feeling that, well, is this okay? And a society saying it's not okay, and it's mixed messages that it's supposed to be okay, but it's not okay. And when it's not okay, that inhibits. That's this thing that you're now forming your sense of self. You're individuating from your parents. It's your first reflection on who you are, and now you're inferior because you have this desire. And it has a huge impact, and not only, as Warren said, are we aware of how this is affecting young men and all of us when we're growing up, but that even as adults today, as we're grown up, we don't realize how shame affects us. For example, a man feeling rejected in sex. The pain of feeling rejected in sex is magnified when one feels ashamed. If one feels innocent and, hey, honey, let's have sex, and she says, oh, not today, you go, okay, when shall we have it? Tomorrow? It'd be as simple as saying, hey, honey, would you like to go for a walk? And she says, no, I'm tired. Okay, I'll go for a walk myself. And there will be no big issue. But when an issue has shame around it, then basically you go, hey, let's go for a walk. A walk? You're a walker? Are you kidding? I wouldn't go on a walk with you. It's a big wound. It's a sore spot that pervades our lives. It becomes a foundation of something so fundamental as sex drive for men to feel inadequate as a result of that. So this is one of these other messages of where, we as parents need to make sure that we start finding the innocence in it ourselves so we can model this innocence and having a positive perspective of these things. But I wanted to add to the whole idea of the shame of just being a man. I think that's one of the first places it starts in our culture. But the other place it starts is with this huge birth in psychology of what most therapists are trained to do. I've seen, I won't say all therapists, but people come to me as a last resort, and they get their marriages saved again and again, which is why the Mars-Venus message is so popular. It really, really helps. And people would come, and part of what men will say is, wow, finally somebody understands me. Wow, somebody points out that I'm not bad. Somebody's pointing out something's not wrong with me because there's so much pressure that due to the feminization of masculine. The men are supposed to be more like women, and somehow being more like women makes us superior beings, and because we're guys, that we're some kind of inferior beings. And it simply can be the simplest thing of the things I talk about is men basically not always wanting to talk about their feelings. You want to come home and forget the problems of the day, and a woman will say something like, what, you don't want to talk? Why don't you want to talk? Why aren't you feeling that way? Why aren't you doing the things that I would do? Why aren't you joining in to help? I always join in to help. Why don't you join in to help? Why do you have to wait to be asked? Why are you wanting to be appreciated? I just do these things. There's so many distinctions that I've drawn in my work between men and women, and if we live in a world where it's all feminine, then anything which is masculine is seen as what's wrong with you, and that is another cause of the shame that we have for being men that really we need to take away by greater understanding and respect for the differences in how they show up and where they show up.
Yeah, no, that's
so well
great.
said, John.
And just to bring it home, Warren, what you said, and John, and what you said both so beautifully. Unique self in each one of these cases changes the game, and that's why it's so critical. Because if you're willing to be disposable, so Warren says you're willing to be disposable to compensate for the shame, right? And that's actually the way that you're actually going to become the hero who will get the maiden. Well, that's really, really important. But actually, if you're living your unique self, then you actually have a sense of the fullness of who you are, which is independent of getting the girl or not. So from that place, whether you do or don't get the girl, you're not going to be driven to radical depression or violence, because you're going to actually realize I have a full, unique authenticity independent of getting the girl, number one. And number two, uniqueness is sexy. It's sexy in the sense that, right, a person living their unique self is actually going to attract into their life their appropriate unique partner. And when a person's living their story, remember that movie, I don't know, a decade ago, Robert Redford and The Natural. It's about you're up to bat and you're doing what you should be doing. You're actually, singing your song. You're actually in your game, right? And every human being is, and that's what John was pointing to earlier, which is the essence of unique self. Every human being is like, that old movie, The Truman Show. It's the central character, the central star, right? It has a unique gift to give that we actually depress in response to, Warren, as you've pointed out, right, the kind of pathological demands of a society on a man. But if I'm actually stepping into my uniqueness, I'll begin to attract, right, into my life, right, the partner who actually meets and sees my unique beauty. So I don't then need to go to an artificial kind of heroic disposability stance to attract the feminine. That's two. And then the last sentence is, and then in terms of sexuality, we need to actually, of course, redefine our relationship to sexuality, which is a key part of the story, and to actually understand that there are many different types of sexuality. In the Unique Self book, we chart 8 different kinds of sexuality, and to actually realize that they all have a place, and we need to actually integrate as part of my unique self, my ego and my chip. We don't evolve beyond our chip. We don't evolve beyond our ego. Right? That's a false enlightenment claim. We evolve beyond our exclusive identification with the chip, our exclusive identification with the ego, right? But we actually include it. We transcend and include the chip, so actually my sexuality is gorgeous. That's the evolutionary vitality living alive in me, and my unique self has to include all of me.
Great. Leslie, do we have another question?
There are. We're at 5:07 o'clock. If you're happy continuing, we can.
I'm open. I'm open to that. Are you? I'm getting emails of just dozens of questions and comments pouring in here, and from people on my list also. But let's take the people that are still with us. Leslie.
Okay, a question.
Give us another question or two, and maybe we'll do a repeat call. Because of the static, we'll do another call in a couple of weeks, and re-invite people. But take it away, Leslie.
Great. A call from San Francisco from an Arne Larson, who says, narcissistic self-involvement might be a real danger in something like you're proposing. What actions do you propose to keep that from developing?
Really good question. John, and I think this is perfect for you, Mark, maybe because of this is core to your authentic self.
Yeah, unique self, right? I want to, by the way, give it the right term. We call it unique self. Our unique self is your authenticity, but the word unique is critical because the word authentic self, right, could also mean, right, me being authentically part of the one. So it's the unique dimension that's critical. So I want to kind of really really invite us to that term unique self. So in terms of unique self, right, which is to live my full unique authenticity, right, of course there's a danger, right? There's a danger for narcissism, but that's not from unique self. Narcissism comes from my deep self-involvement with my contracted ego. What unique self says is I've got to actually have an experience of moving beyond my ego, right, touching into my true self. And my true self is the part of me that is part of the all, that's connected to everything. Right? It's the realization that I'm part of the larger seamless code of the universe. I've actually touched into what John called that oceanic sense of source. And from that place, I then, as the next step, right, emerge into a realization that source, that ocean, lives and breathes uniquely in me. And that's how we avoid the narcissism. In other words, this is really critical. I'm so glad, and thank you so much for that question. Unique self is not a typology of ego in which I'm narcissistically involved in my own egoic struggle and grasping. Unique self is an expression of source living uniquely as me. And when source lives uniquely as me, I feel a natural connection to everyone as source. Right? When I meet John and Warren, I don't say, hey, I can't believe, why are they working on that Boys to Men's book? I mean, I should have written a book like that. No, I say, no, that's their unique expressions coming together, gorgeously, but addressing this Boys to Men issue, and I'm delighted because source needs that addressed. Reality needs that addressed. And me, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to write specifically about unique self because that's my unique expression. And that's really, really important distinction. Unique self is never about narcissistic self-involvement, right? It's always about the unique expression of source, and so uniqueness becomes not the currency of separation. Uniqueness becomes the currency of connection, the puzzle piece that connects me to all that is. And that's a really, really critical distinction that we really need to realize. If you see a person narcissistically contracting, you know they're an ego. They're not a unique self. Unique self opens me up. That's the litmus test of unique self. The litmus test of unique self is I meet someone, right, and I say, wow, that is awesome. I am so happy to meet you. And you can do, right, Warren Farrell can do something that no matter how hard I try, Mark's never going to be able to do it. I'm just never going to do it. Okay. I'm never going to give that gift. And the same thing as John. So that's where we come from in this.
Mark, let me ask you to take that and in relation to some of the emails I'm getting here, take that and sort of relate that to some of the questions I'm getting on the emails that are coming through are to the effect of, let's say, what about when I have to do something that I don't want to do? So let's say your obligations to raise Zion and make certain amounts of money to make that happen, and your obligations financially to your other boys and your daughter are coming into conflict with having the type of freedom to express yourself in the world the way you'd like to. And so you're caught between obligations that you've made and commitments that you've made to people that you love on the one hand, and the time that it takes to sort of explore and create and flesh out your uniqueness. How do you personally deal with that in relation to your everyday life?
That's an awesome question, and I'd love to answer that, and of course invite you, John, to respond to it as well, because I think that's like the crux of the matter. In other words, what the question is asking, which is such a great question. Well, if I'm a writer and I'm writing like my unique book, so there's a few people like that in the world. But what about like all of us, who actually have like real obligations that we need to meet, which doesn't seem to be an expression of our kind of unique Nobel Prize creativity. Right, so that's so great, because actually unique self is not only about my kind of public creativity, right, which is the kind of penultimate expression of starting a new company as an entrepreneur, writing a new book. Unique self is how I uniquely show up, right, in life. So my raising of Zion, for example, right, raising Zion or being involved with Zion or showing up in some steady way in Zion's life, supporting Zion, participating in supporting Zion financially, right, is, right, a unique obligation of my life, right, because, right, in some unique way, I met Mariana, we gave birth to Zion, and so I have a unique relationship to Zion. And so working with Zion in a way which is steady, whatever that way is, or working with Eitan and Yair, my older boys, right, is an expression of my unique creativity. Right? It is an expression. If I view it just as an obligation, I've got to kind of check off my obligations to Eitan and Yair and kind of get the bills paid, but if I actually view that relationship as a unique invitation to express, right, my guidance, my fathering qualities, my love, right, my firm, discipline and boundaries, right, and I actually engage it as a unique self invitation, so then pretty much anything I do in my life, right, is a way, because it's not so much what I do, Warren, and it's how I engage it. And I can heroically, uniquely engage virtually any activity and bring my unique sense of presence, love, compassion, humor, right, delight, right, to that situation and turn the fate of my life into the unique destiny, right, of my unique self by the way I engage in it, by the way I relate to it, right, and by the way I give myself to it.
Mm-hmm. And so let's say you're somebody in Detroit who's working on an assembly line or some version thereof, assisting a robot to do something and feeling partly like a robot himself or herself, and is feeling like, so much is pent up inside of him or her, that this is meeting the obligations that I need to meet, but I really can't get out from underneath this and to really express another part of me. Do you advise or do you work with a person like that to sort of do that work that is repetitious and routine and is not an expression of another part of himself, to do that with more energy, with more? Where do you go with that?
Three things. One, if you can get out of the job, get out of it. That's one. Meaning, if you're able to find a job that more clearly addresses your own creativity, you should. That's number one. Number two, right? If you have to stay in that job, right, then two, bring your maximum creativity to the relationships between other people at the job. Right, to creating an appropriate social environment at the job. And then three, right, then also use that job, right, to create stability in your life in order to express your uniqueness, right, outside of the job, because your job is not your unique self. Your unique self expresses yourself in your relationship, in your community, right, in all of the matrices of your life, and it's not reducible to your job. So in your job, you bring your maximal unique creativity. You go for the job with the best unique self-creativity, and you create the stable conditions to live your unique self, right, in all of the other jobs, of which there are 16 of them, 16 hours a day out of 24, which unique self comes to play. John, I thought you sounded like you wanted to jump into that.
Yes.
Actually, you said it quite beautifully. You could have described my life in what you just said, which is kind of where I was going with it, which is, having found through my own spiritual journey and discipline and so forth what you have labeled, and I would agree with you, which is true self, authentic self, that undifferentiated universal spirit that pervades us all, which creates a sense of oneness. And when you experience that, then the only place you can go from there is to manifest that through your own unique self and finding that journey to find your unique self. And for me, the first step in doing that, having been a monk and having no money, was to gain a trade and to do whatever I felt I could do to follow that inner instinct. What can I do to survive here? What job can I get? How can I make enough money to survive? I had to make that the primary need. And so it was finding something that, I became a computer programmer. I went to a trade school, became a computer programmer, and it saved up my money so I would have more and more time to do what I was more drawn to do, which was to teach classes on relationships and sexuality. This is back almost 35 years ago. And so I knew this is where I wanted to go. This brought life to me, the teaching aspect of me, but I needed to survive. So what I had to do is for a limited amount of time during the day, I would earn the money doing the things that didn't really express all of who I was, but I had to bring all of myself to that. And my response to the question is, no matter what situation you're in, when you have to do something, recognize what I have to do is required for me to get to where I want to go. It's all part of that journey. And to the extent that I couldn't do that, and also the message to myself that here we are saying, I was saying to you, I'm required to do this, but I don't want to do this. That's what I had to keep letting go of, is the I don't want to. And the way that would show up in me was actually massive neck tension when I was doing the programming with COBOL back in those days, the big computers at Stanford. And I had this huge neck tension when I would do it. I was good at it. I could do it. But literally some part of my soul says, John, you've got enough money to start moving on. And until I started to move on, I had that neck tension. I think our body will manifest in distress and in pain to a certain extent when we're not aligned with, that expression of unique self. I had talked about at those times your soul's purpose, your soul's journey, what we're here to do. And as I started moving in that direction, then all of that tension had gone away to where I could create a life where almost everything I do, I can be expressing my creative self, but there's other parts of me that aren't my creative self, so those parts have to be expressed as well. But I think the key to unique self is always coming back to looking at your authentic response to situations, and if there's any confusion and fear and anger or grief or sadness, to be able to authentically look at that and let go of negativity and come back to positivity, which is how your authentic self expresses itself as unique self. And so the process for me of being a spiritual being, I had to start owning all my shadow inside, the hidden parts of me that resist things, to find them and let them go. And in letting them go, then spirit could move forth as unique self from being authentic self. So I really like that distinction that you make, Mark. I think it's a huge contribution for people to simplify this perspective.
Thank you so much. That's awesome.
Great. Leslie, do we have one final question or comment? Or is there anybody, are people able to be can we hear their actual voices? Can people speak up in that respect?
At this time, there's no one raising their hand. If there's someone in our listeners who would like to press *2 and ask a question verbally, go right ahead.
Okay. Is Heather Ferris still on the phone?
Is who?
Heather Ferris has emailed me about the importance of meditation in terms of creating stillness that allows the unique self to rise, but I didn't know whether she was actually physically on the phone to ask that question.
Heather is on the call, and we've just had 2 people raise their hands. So.
Okay, so let's go to somebody who's raised his hand.
And this will be our last question, folks.
All right. So I am unmuting Steve Ellman in Bexley. You're on, Steve.
Very good. I'm actually in San Rafael, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate and applaud your efforts to clarify and articulate the next evolutionary state. In listening to your talk, what came to mind, I have a son as well as 2 daughters, is the role of the male in the modern world. The boys, they're finding their unique identities now. They're doing their heroic quest, and what's happening, it's all being done on video games. And so I hope that you men will be able to address that in your book, because what's happening is they're entering a virtual world where they can be authentic in their own mind and do epic kind of journeys, heroic journeys, take on attributes and tasks that they're able to perform, get rewarded by their peers, move up the chain of command. So we're moving to a virtual world, and I think all of us are on the other side of this generational gap, and it's an issue that has to be addressed because the young men are turning now to a virtual world to fulfill this need of becoming a man. And I would like to hear your comments on that.
May I take a stab at that one?
Please, Warren, and include the nuclear incumbents.
Oh, yeah, actually, that's where I was going to start. Very good. Yeah, there's first of all, what you're saying, Steve, is so on the money, if you will, or the spiritual journey. And here's why. When a person succeeds at a video game, the blood engorges the nucleus accumbens, but it does, and the nucleus accumbens motivates you, gives you dopamine to win at what you are playing the game at. However, so if you're playing the game Steve Madden football, it will motivate you to win at that game. But there's another part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that allows you to translate things, victories and motivation into real life accomplishments in the real world. So if you win at at Madden football, it is it is inversely related to your likelihood of winning at real life. Now, this is not true at the 5-hour or 6-hour a week involvement with video games. At that level, most of the evidence is that it adds to a number of skill sets. When you start getting significantly beyond that, the average male spends in video games 13 hours a week. When you get to that 13-hour-a-week level, then it tends to be more toward addiction. So you're less likely to be able to want to come to dinner on time. You're less likely to want to do your homework. And here's where parents have an important role. The moment a parent says to me or to John or something to the effect of like, I can't get my son to give up video games, the problem is with not the son, but the parent. The parent has 100 different ways of getting the son to give up video games. One is not buying it to begin with. Number 2 is unplugging it and putting it in the attic, the cellar, or tossing it out if need be, or giving it to a friend who needs it more, who isn't abusing it. But parents, and particularly, and this relates to another dimension of today's world, which is 1/3 of children are being raised without father involvement. And fathers tend to be the ones who are good at it, more likely to enforce boundaries. And particularly in divorce situations, oftentimes a single mom will feel guilty about confronting a child, and she'll often say something like, I just can't get my son to stop. Well, parents need to enforce boundaries and recognize that they have 100 things that they do for their children all the time, from taking them places to buying them things and so on, to giving them foods that they like or don't like. And if that leverage is not used to help to make sure that a child does not move to the place where they control you, as opposed to you helping him or her do what's best for the child, then we have a problem that is right up the line of what you were implying, I believe, Steve.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I'd love to just take a quick stab for a second, Warren. John?
Sure,
okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Steve, first off, it's lovely to meet you. I look forward to talking to you. I've heard about you from Warren and from, I think, Mark Schillinger, if I've got the right Steve.
Yes, you do.
Totally great. So let me just address this, because I think it's connected also to the earlier question we got about, kind of beware of narcissism or kind of self-involvement, as we look for uniqueness. So the same distinction applies. And a unique self is an expression of me being rooted, right, in source, right, in all that is, in true authenticity or true self, if you will. And the nature of being rooted in true self, right, is that I actually feel deeply connected. It's profoundly relational, right? I actually feel the love that animates the cosmos, right, as the animating eros of my life. And it's not love as a kind of saccharine Hallmark card kind of thing. It's love as the allurement, as the connectivity that adheres, that creates the invisible lines of connection that connect all with the all with utter delight and radical ecstasy. And so that can't be addressed by self-separated video games. And it's the heroic need, right, for achievement per se as a separate self. That's why these distinctions matter so much. That's why we need to create deeper fields of meaning, and we need to reclaim new languages, right, which infiltrate and become part of the source code of our culture. I can fulfill as a separate self my need for achievement by playing a lone video game. Absolutely true. But once I've actually shattered that illusion of being a separate self and begun to realize that I'm part of the seamless code of the universe, that source lives in me and as me, that I'm connected to this larger context, that I'm playing a larger game as an actual first-person realization. And that first-person realization is available, right, to every human being. And that's what John and I were talking about when we talked in different languages about what I call the democratization of enlightenment, or the democratization of greatness. That actually every human being, particularly the millennials, right, and younger, generation, are now having access to at least a taste of this experience. The environment is pointing out to our interconnectivity in a way that masters 1,500 years ago, had to work, 50 years to accomplish. We actually realize our deep interconnectivity, and now we're actually getting first-person experiences, right, of some enlightened consciousness, some sense of this deeper interconnectivity. And from that place, right, the ecstatic urgency of realizing my uniqueness emerges. That can't be fulfilled through video games. Because the second I realize I'm part of this enmeshment of love intelligence that's finding its way in the evolutionary unfolding.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Is that John?
Yeah, we're good. I think we'll just keep going, whatever that was. Right? If I don't locate myself in that broader evolutionary context, then I'm not fulfilled. So I think that's really the core of the whole thing. And that distinction kind of feels essential. That was a great inquiry, Steve. I'm not sure if you're still on the line. We've had so much line trouble. But at least we got that distinction out, and I hope you're still with us.
I'm here. I appreciate the answer. I'm just suggesting that you will meet boys at the level of addicted to the video games, and the way to be able to transfer the addiction to what you're talking about, more of a pineal gland love addiction, is going to be the art form of it all.
Well,
yeah, I think that's right, and that's a great conversation. Leslie, Warren, if I can, why don't we let's wrap up here. We're actually a half hour over our commitment to people. Warren, does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether we should allow that last person who has a verbal possibility.
Oh, absolutely. Please.
Please. And then we'll end with that person. Leslie, is that okay?
Yes, he is still here. His name.
Take it away.
This is a person from Bozeman, Montana. You're unmuted?
Oh, thank you. My name's Sam. I've been a sex offender therapist here in the state of Montana for a while now, and this question is particularly for Warren. One of the things that I've talked to my guys a lot about is my belief that sex crimes are often not caused by an overabundance of testosterone or an overabundance of masculinity, but by a lower level of it, or a decreased amount of masculinity, not enough masculinity, or a breakdown in it. And I have read or seen references to an article you wrote years ago on how we teach men to be rapists. And I was wondering, what do you think about my approach to that, or would you have anything to add?
Well, first of all, this is really one of the things I really wanted from this call was people adding to me and us. And so my sort of thoughts about that are already out there, but you're the one that's the expert in this area. So would you be good enough to add your thoughts to us on that issue? What is you're experiencing people every day? I am not. So
I think he just mentioned his theory, Warren, is that it's actually a lack of masculinity that leads to sex crimes, which right. I would completely agree. And that's your perspective, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So tell me how you, in your everyday work, how do you arrive at that? And then, John, your thoughts on that also?
Right. I'll explain the physiology of it, but if you'd like him to talk more, I'm happy to listen.
Either way.
Okay. I think it's just kind of a hunch that I've arrived at over the years of hearing guys talk about not just the crime itself and how it kind of played out, but their core beliefs about who they are as people, usually emerging from a combination of really severely, often is not severe physical abuse in childhood that really, somebody can only take so many headshots and their brain chemistry and wiring gets distorted, or they come up with really weird beliefs about what it means to be male, and they begin to see other men as competitors and all that kind of stuff. There is also some research that supports that men really lack that sex offenders really lack male social support, and that's actually a mitigating factor and that's actually a factor that in recidivism. So it was a combination of listening to that and hearing about their beliefs about sexuality, about human sexuality, and about who they were as men. And so I didn't start off with the belief that sex crimes came about as a decrease in masculinity. Matter of fact, my education in therapy was very much that sex crimes were a result of male power and privilege, and it's this kind of testosterone-fueled kind of thing, combined with in a strange, seemingly paradoxical belief that sex crimes aren't about a need for sex, or they're not sexual in nature. they're just about male power and control, kind of going astray.
Yes, I would definitely agree with where you're going on that. John, your thoughts, and then I'll add my thought as well.
I certainly have my thoughts, but as you started to evolve your thoughts, the talking more, you're actually reinforcing the amazing work that Warren has done, where people continue to think that it's an expression of male power, where Warren talks about just the opposite, explains it just the opposite, that men don't have this power, but it does come from a place of powerlessness and shame where those crimes emerge. Mm-hmm. When we talked about this earlier, when the male is considered, unworthy of love and respect and admiration, particularly around sexuality, and compound that to probably being out of work or not having power in your life, feeling inadequate as a male, that you're not living up to the standard of a male, of a good male, A, and B, compound that with you're also just happen to be a male with sex drive, and so that's bad. Then when you have increased shame around sex, sexual rejection, when you feel rejected around sex, it's like poking at a wound inside there, right, as opposed to, oh, you're not interested in sex with me? Well, I'll see somebody else, or we can wait until later today. We had talked about that earlier, how the shame exaggerates the response of rejection, of sexual rejection, of the lack of being able to have that desire gratified right away, etc. Now, when you talked about actually men becoming less masculine, because you mentioned that, testosterone, we know, is the very masculine hormone, and the more muscle mass a manly man has, the higher his testosterone levels. Well, it's actually shown now that violence in men actually doesn't come from the high testosterone at all. Is that violence, whether it be sexual violence or non-sexual violence, just violence in men occurs when a man. It does occur when a man feels powerless to solve a problem. Okay, you're rejected. There's nothing you can do about it. You feel powerless to solve the problem. You feel threatened. You feel in danger, whether it be a fight or in any situation. Once a man begins feeling powerless, an enzyme called aromatase gets produced, and it begins converting his high testosterone, which is there to give him faster reaction time to solve a problem and defend himself. That high testosterone then gets converted into estrogen. Now, estrogen is the female hormone. He suddenly becomes feminized, feeling powerless and in danger, and his brain is flooded with emotion. And if he is feeling the emotion of shame at that time rather than the emotion of frustration, it's a big difference. If you feel a lot of frustration, then you become more focused on what can I do to fix this, and you're more objective. But if the emotion that comes up is shame, you're now activating blood flow not just to the emotional limbic system, but also to the reptilian part of the brain, which is completely unconscious. We have no control over it at all. They've seen soldiers going into danger, for example. The reptilian back part of the brain actually gets bigger, and the front part of the brain shrinks. I might mention here one of the other things about the video games we were talking about earlier is that the research is showing that after an hour of playing a video game, blood flow stops or decreases to the front part of the brain, and most of it goes to the nucleus accumbens in the middle part of the brain, which is another nice physical measurement showing that, too much video games, for example, disconnects you from the front part of your brain. Well, shame, for sure, is something that connects you more to the back part of your brain and not to the forefront of your brain. And it's the front part of our brain where we're actually expressing our unique self. Our authenticity comes through our unique self only when blood flow is going to the front part of the brain, the civilized part of the brain, the part of the brain where we can make decisions and choices and actually have a different point of view and change our point of view. All of that flexibility and higher consciousness comes above and control, whereas the further back in the brain we go, the more reactive we are, the more out of control we are. And it's basically in the back part of the brain, the regulating belief system there is an eye for an eye. If you've hurt me, I'll hurt you. And the desire to control others to survive without consideration of another point of view. And that's where sex crimes would take place, is back in that part of the brain. So we want to culture our children and adults as well to be in the front part of their brain, as well as for men have to learn how to control emotions. And because what happens is when men become overly feminized, that's when they become most violent. And that's a huge revelation. Most people aren't aware of that. There's a book called Testosterone, the Pesky Hormone, where they proved this theory that I'm putting forth here. It's physiological that testosterone converts to estrogen. Estrogen makes you more sensitive to feeling hurt, to feeling rejected, to feeling shamed, to feeling in danger, and then wanting to react and attack.
That's why I'm always working with my guys on emotional reasoning and really trying to process early developmental experiences of shame. So it sounds like a lot of the things that I've just kind of naturally kind of fell into have really kind of on the right track.
Very good.
Nicely done.
I'll just add one little thought to that in terms of the powerlessness issue. Thank you, John. That was really an extraordinary explanation.
Wonderful.
If you think about Flint, Michigan, for example, there was a point in time when Flint, Michigan had one of the lowest rape and sex crime rates in the country, and there was also a very, very high employment rate at that point in time in Flint, Michigan. And then General Motors laid off a huge number of people. It was one of the biggest layoffs of any point in American history. And so I forget how many people it was that were laid off at the same time. But very quickly, Flint, Michigan went to become one of the highest levels, percentage-wise, of both rape and domestic violence. And no one would make the argument, I don't believe, that the men in Flint, Michigan were feeling more powerful when they were laid off. They were feeling experiences of greater amounts of powerlessness. And it's from powerlessness, and of course when they're laid off, the testosterone is reduced, not increased. That's when the physical violence and rape go up. So I think when we look at physical violence, physical abuse, domestic violence, we can see it as a momentary act of power to compensate for an underlying experience of powerlessness.
Exactly.
And once we see that, then we begin to work on different solutions to it, which is how to empower each man and woman. So if I have a wife or a sister, and my sister says, let's say to me, Warren, you were always Dad's favorite, and I interrupt her, and then I distort what she says. The chances of her, if I distort and interrupt her, the chances of her getting frustrated and perhaps hitting me are much greater than if I say, gee, Gail, I never realized that Gail's my sister's name, gee, Gail, I never realized that from your experience. Tell me more about how that was and how that feels. And then I draw her out and let her know how I feel about that. The more I learn the skills to empower myself to hear her without feeling defensive, the less likely I am to engage, and the more she hears me, the less likely I am to engage in domestic violence of any sort. So the solution becomes different when we understand that the experience that generates the basis of rape and domestic violence is an experience that starts with powerlessness, and we give people an alternative route to feeling empowered than the route of raping or physical violence.
Right, and power, right, Warren, that you're pointing out in this beautiful hermeneutic, kind of which emerges. And can everyone still hear me?
I can, yes.
Right, awesome. So power in the end is unique. In other words, so one form of power, of course, is listening communication, and that's got to ultimately lead and be grounded in the power of living my unique self. Because what unique self is, and it's such a beautiful way to end this call on, Warren and John and people from our list, and I think mostly we're from Warren's and John's list, and Warren, who really convened and created this call together so we could kind of talk about how boys to men and unique self have this conversation. So it's just such a perfect way to end, because this hermeneutic of powerlessness that our caller, points out, so beautifully, that John then kind of developed the physiology and some of the internal mechanics, and Warren, you really explicated this hermeneutic, right, brings us directly back to unique self. Because my sense of power comes from living my unique self, giving my unique gifts, right, expressing, right, bringing my fullness of my unique self to whatever engagement I'm involved in. And depression, powerlessness, is also replaceability, right, the feeling that if I'm not here, someone else is going to be doing it. They don't quite much matter. And the enormous sense of power that I get from knowing that I'm giving a service. I'm being love in a particular way that no one else can do it. I'm a lover. A lover, I don't mean sexually, of course. I mean a lover, an expression of the love intelligence. Right? I'm actually shining love in a place in the world where there's unlove in a way that no one else is going to quite do it like me, invests me with such a feeling, not just of meaning, but of power. Right? And so unique self becomes an authentic source of power which directly addresses the boy's crisis, right, in that gorgeous way.
Yeah. Nicely said.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've done. We've gained from the questions that are being asked. It's really been a really wonderful opportunity for the three of us to connect with each other, and I think deepen our sort of synergy as well. So I thank the callers a great deal, and John and Mark, you guys were brilliant as you always are.
As were you, Warren.
Thank you both.
Thank you, John.
And thank you, Mark. Thank you, Warren, and thank all of the callers and the listeners. Appreciate the opportunity to share in this wonderful conversation.
If you were at all inspired by it, I really encourage you to sort of tap into the part of the email that gave you the access to Marc Gafni's Your Unique Self book, which is really, just out, and a really extraordinary explanation of some of the distinctions between unique self and how to translate that into everyday life.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Thanks, Leslie.
It's been really great. Thank you very much, Leslie.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Bye, John. Bye, Warren. Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Good night, Leslie.
Good night, guys.